Hello, Godot users. Today we'll be exploring how to use the Godot documentation to better understand the engine and answer questions you cannot find via tutorials, plus a bonus way to learn things at an even deeper level. Tutorials are wonderful, but they will never cover every nook and cranny, so mastering the art of finding things yourself when no one else has documented it can save you a ton of heartache. Let's get into it. The first way to view the documentation we'll be looking at is in the editor itself. There are two ways to access this information. The first, we'll bring up the script editor and then press F1. This brings up a list of every node, etc. in the editor. You can then type in the search bar at the top to filter the list down to what you are looking for. We'll type in character body, which leaves us with character body 2D and 3D, along with the inheritance hierarchy that leads to them. This is important, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Double-clicking on an entry brings us to the documentation. It begins with the node name and icon, then the list of everything it inherits from, same as the list we saw on the F1 screen. The leftmost item is the immediate parent. Going further up the tree as the list moves to the right until we get to the object that everything inherits from. Next, we find it has a brief description followed by a lengthier one. Notice how this paragraph mentions move and slide along with move and collide, so it can give hints of what is required to use the node. After the description, we will find a list of online tutorials. Clicking on any of them takes you to the Godot website and the specific tutorial listed in your browser. Once we get past the online tutorials, we reach the meat of the docs. Starting with the properties, it lists everything, beginning with the properties type, followed by its name, which is clickable to go on to more in-depth information about it, and finally the default value if you do not change it. So for example, we notice on this first one that it's a bool that is floor block on wall and default true. We click on it and it takes us to the more specific docs and tells us if true, the body will be able to move on the floor. This option avoids to be able to walk on walls. It will, however, allow it to slide down along them. After properties, we'll find the list of methods for a given node. Each entry shows us the return type, the name of the node, which is clickable, same as the properties, and then a list of parameters and their types. Any parameter with a default value will include that default here. You'll notice some of these, such as get floor angle, have a const after the name. This tells us that the calling function will not change the underlying node, only return a value based on the state of that node as the value is passed in, if any. So we see that move and slide returns a bool. Then it tells us that it moves based on velocity. So despite the fact that we don't pass it in, we know that it's using the velocity of the body. It mentions how if it interacts with another character body or rigid body, it will be affected by the motion of the other body. So that's more useful information to tell us how this works. And it tells us that it can modify the velocity if a slide collision occurred. So beyond the position, it can change the velocity. And so we can find out about last collision. So it's giving us other methods we might want to call afterwards if we need certain extra information. Then it tells us about how the moving platform can change the velocity by being on it. And finally, it tells us that if it collided with something, it will return true. Otherwise, it returns false. Now that we've covered the basis, an important note. Each document only includes properties and methods directly implemented on the node covered. So for example, we'll search for move and collide. Side note, pressing Ctrl F allows you to search for text within a document if necessary. Move and collide is only mentioned in the description. If we go up to the inheritance list and click on physics body 2D, we'll find it listed here. This can be extremely confusing when you get started, so always keep in mind if you cannot find what you're looking for, it is probably further up the inheritance tree. Luckily, there is another way to find what you are looking for. Going back to an actual script, we'll hold Control and hover over various methods and variables. Notice that they are underlined when we hover over them. Another side note, if you click on something to find inside the script, it will take you to the definition, so this can make exploring your own code easier. But if we click on underbar process, we'll find it takes us to the node documentation because every node has underbar process as well as underbar physics process immediately above it. This can make finding information very quick if you're confused about why code you just wrote is not working without having to find the right node and then find the method on it. So this is the basics of how to use the inbuilt editor tools to look at documentation and better learn how everything works. I find all of them useful at various times depending on what I'm running into. If I just need to read up on a node period, I will use F1. If I need to find out about a specific method or property that I'm already using, I will often control click. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, so next up we have the Godot site at docs.godotengine.org. You'll notice it says en stable. So if you're using a different version, you should go to the right one. So like let's say you go to 4.1 because you got in the middle of a game and you don't want to upgrade. This will give you the correct docs for 4.1. Note if you go further back, so I'll go to like 3.1, it gives you a warning that you're looking at very old version of the documentation. So make sure you are looking at the right docs for your current version if you're coming to the website. Here on the left, you'll notice class reference, and it has nodes. We'll scroll down, character body, discolored because I've been here recently. Starts off with breadcrumbs describing how to navigate the site, tells you you're up to date. Then it's, okay, here's character body with the inheritance list going from immediate parent all the way back to the root of the tree. The descriptions are the same. You've got the tutorials, which just like the editor, it's going to show up in your browser. So if you have questions about particular topics, these docs can be very useful if they're covering what you're trying to do. So keep them in mind. Now we have the properties. They're tabular now, a benefit of being in the HTML version instead of the Godot engine version. You have the type of the property, the name, and the default value. These are clickable to go to more information about them. Then you've got the methods, where you've got the return type, the name. If you have parameters, it lists them. Note, unlike with the engine docs, that it will list the value of the parameter first, and then it also tells you the default value if it has one. If it's const, it will list that. So that shows a lot of the same things. If that was the only reason the Godot site was useful, then it wouldn't be worth talking about much. But the thing to keep in mind is you can always just do a Google search. So like Godot engine and then character body 2D, and it will take you to the docs. And, you know, same standard thing. But you can also search for something like underbar process. In this case, it takes you to documentation about it. If you're doing Google searches, searching by the node may not help, going back to the problem that you'll run into where if a method is from a parent and gotten via inheritance, it not showing up on the right page. But that can be very confusing. So depending on what you're dealing with, also it may take you to a forum page before it takes you to a tutorial or the docs or Reddit, as you see here. So the thing I will tell you is using Google is a handy tool, but you do not want to only use it, which is why I'm covering all these different options. What I would say is learn to keep in mind what luck you've had with each method in various contexts and use the one that most quickly gets you to the information you need. Because in the end, the faster you get the information, the faster you get back to coding. Okay, so the last method we're going to talk about today is actually looking at the source code. So you can find it on GitHub. I'm just searching for Godot Engine GitHub on Google. Note, you have to be logged in for this, but I can actually sit here and search the code base, and you'll notice the first choice is code. You can also see issues, etc. if you're curious about stuff. But for example, here is character body 2d.h, where it's doing the definition We can go into it for a sec. So here's the header. Important note, anytime you see this GD class, that is telling you it is registering it for the scripting engine to see. If you ever want to write code in C++ for GD extension, you need to do this. It is how you tell the engine that this is a node, and also, like in this case, it inherits from physics body 2D, so that it knows how everything works together, how everything's wired up, and it gives you access to all that information. Looking through GitHub can educate you on exactly how things work. Obviously, depending on how well you know C++, that can be more or less useful. Like if you aren't used to reading templates or pointer code, some of this stuff will be incredibly arcane. And if that's the case and you can't understand it, totally fair. I will say learning a little bit of C++ can go a long way with game dev, even if you're mostly writing code in something like GD script, just because it will let you look at the engine code and learn from it. So let's do a quick real world example. I was curious about groups in Godot, so I looked up and ended up going to add to group. And you'll find, so for example, you have H files, which defines the interface for a class that needs to be shared to other code. CPP files have the actual definitions. So we'll click here, and you'll notice after a sec, it actually jumps us to it. So you can see all of the information where it has some error checking. It says if the particular node is already there, just return, don't try to add it again. Otherwise, it builds up the group data and adds it to a dictionary. So due to the fact that it is creating a dictionary and not having to iterate through the nodes looking for ones that have the group, that means it is much faster than I realized. And so I had a habit of using auto loads and making properties on those that represent, let's say, the player. And then the player in its ready function would set the reference in the auto load to itself so that others could look up via the auto load instead of having like every enemy referencing a copy of the player. Well, a reference to the player, I should say. And this is more efficient because anytime you can let the engine do work for you, it is probably faster because it's in C++ code. And I am a big fan of trusting the engine. They've tested their code way more than I'm testing mine. If you're an exception to that, like treat it how you will, but just keep in mind that their code is more battle tested since they've been run by a lot of games and people report issues. And this can help you know how to use your code, how to write your code, and how to be efficient. This was an introduction into how to learn the Godot engine better, from the in-editor docs to the website in Google to diving into the engine source code on GitHub. Each of these tools has its own set of pros and cons that will make them better in different situations, so you should always keep them all in your pocket. Tutorials are a wonderful tool to speed up learning because someone else took the time to figure it out, which can require some amount of guess check revise to get answers to your questions. However, that process can give you surprising results that might make your game more unique. Besides, there will never be tutorials for every way you can use the engine. It is far too complex. Being able to get answers for yourself will make you a better game developer. I will say that there are things like patterns, like look at Bitlytic's latest video as an example, that you will never find in the documentation. And if you don't have a computer science background, those can be incredibly useful. So keep that in mind and look for those regularly. They may give you a new way to structure your code that is better. As always, if you have questions, leave a comment below and I'll do my best to answer. If the question leads to a new long-form video, I'll credit you in the introduction. Good luck on making your games, and I hope you have a great day.